Dialogue series. Hello, YouTube. Hello, everyone. Today we're talking with Julie Sherwood, and I've been sort of promoting this as astrology off the charts. How do we take what we know, make it robustly useful? What do we do with it? How do we heal? And Julie, you're a healer. And I'd like to invite you to say something about your own work, if you'd be so kind. Please introduce yourself to the people who don't know you already, in your own words, maybe.
Well, hello, YouTube world and Star family and all those out there. So again, as Michael said, I'm Julie Sherwood, and I do have my own work under Your Best Hopes Wellness Coaching. And I got into that. I started in I started in the legal world. Then I moved into mainstream medicine and medical education, in graduate medical education, and then also in medical college education. And I started to see how the practitioners, as they were being pushed through the system, and I mean that quite literally, pushed through the system, they started to lose their enamored point of view of providing healthcare to their patients and the world that they were looking to serve.
Right.
So that's a turning point when I started to realize, how can I support these people beyond the administrative side of things? And I got my coaching credentials doing that in a way that I thought, how can I be a support system for the people who are supporting us as healthcare providers, right? So along that journey, I stumbled into the world of true sidereal constellational astrology, and boy, that blew the doors off. So I really enjoyed learning more about myself from the star perspective, the constellational perspective, and really began to understand how that is a part of our story, a part of our journey, a part of who we are in the world. And then I added some training in Reiki medicine and things like that. So, these are the different pieces that I look at in mind, body, spirit wellness in guiding people on their journey to well-being. So that's the high fly view.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your work. That sounds really interesting. And there's probably, so many rabbit holes we'll have to avoid relative to the conversations, the potential for conversations that we could have.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, to stay on point, we'll have to avoid talking about the structure of the medical industry, or maybe we won't. Maybe we'll tie that in. But I want to keep this, as always, I want to keep it focused constructively and in and of itself in a healing way to just be of benefit to the people. I don't want to take this time and just moan and complain about this is broken and that's broken and the insurance companies and all these, people don't get the care they need.
Right. We already know that, right?
Right. We know that because the people who don't get the care they need come to us.
Right.
And say, well, I talked to these doctors, but they didn't listen. And,
right.
Jeffrey Wolf Green often joked that the astrologer was the doctor of last resort.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I, the orientation I come from in terms of the coaching work I did is actually called solution focused coaching, right? So we're looking at the solution rather than rooting ourselves in the problem all the time. So charts can provide that energy potential for solution.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I'm often quick to cite Tibetan medicine, in which astrology is a recognized branch, and they do a sidereal thing. They tend towards the even sign, but the Tibetan astrology is a little different. It's mostly they would look at someone's natal chart and sort of diagnose like their whole physical, emotional, kind of medical. They would just get a medical profile off that, where a lot of the work I do, and I think you do, and many people today do, is very psychological. It's very much about archetypes within a person's interior experience and how the archetypes are interacting with each other. But in the Tibetan sort of practice of astrology. They would look at some of the same things we would say. We would focus on like, oh, that person may, they may, I'll just invent Mercury square Uranus natally, which is a classic signifier of high intelligence, but it creates anxiety. So people are often sort of like a little bit less confident in early life. Geniuses, though, and we have all these ideas, they wouldn't care, would they? They wouldn't care about any of that. They'd say, oh, that's probably likely. They would only focus on the like that anxiety is going to like resonate through their system, and it's going to need to be tonified. We're going to need to give herbs and treatments, maybe acupunctures, acupressures, whatever, that create the antidote in the mind to that,
Yes.
right?
And I think the key point in all of that is helping them, the clients or the people that we work with, understand the potentiality for that energy. I love using, you and I've talked before about the term energy potential. Just because there's a marker in the chart does not mean it's, oh my God, it's going to be this way.
That's
it has
right.
a potential for that. And when we recognize and help our clients see the potentiality for, say, that Mercury square Uranus, instead of saying, oh, you've got this Mercury square Uranus, that's horrible. It's like, okay, you've got some challenges that could potentially show themselves.
Right.
And this is what we think they could be.
Right.
And these are the antidotes, if you will, to
Right.
the challenges in that energy, right?
Right.
And I think that's huge. I think that's absolutely huge.
I do too. It's huge, and it represents a daunting question for astrologers, which is if you're an astrologer, I think oftentimes there's a desire to do healing work. There's a desire to be of meaningful benefit to people, to be of profound benefit to people. But then, I mean, this has happened to me. It's probably happened to you. It's probably happened to everyone in your early astrological sort of forays. You get someone, and they're like at your desk, or they're on the other end of a call, and they're telling you, you're like, oh, looking at the chart, trying to say something. And they're like, yeah, well, you touch on something maybe verbally, and they respond. They could say like, well, this was like X, Y, or Z horror story.
Right.
Yeah, in my early life, let's say they tell you something that represents an adverse childhood experience, by definition, an ACE, something we know in the modern psychological field is associated with traumatic holding in the body. The body will hold that trauma, and you're sitting there with them, and it's at a certain point, I think so many astrologers go through this, they realize like, what do I tell this person? I'm not necessarily qualified to like be a healer. And I think a lot of people just recommend to a healer.
Yes.
But I think it points to something that you have taken it to we could say the next level. We could say you've taken it to a level where you've addressed that. I don't want to look at it as a deficiency. I don't see astrology as deficient. I see astrology as diagnostic. You can look at a chart, and it's not going to necessarily like get that traumatic like tension, the tightness, the anger that's always caused you those problems. It's not going to get that out of your system to stare at a chart. So how do you get that out of your system, Julie? What do we do? Okay.
So some examples. This is a perfect segue into, so one of the other areas that I'm working on in bringing into my skill set and my work that I do, because the chart is a roadmap, it's a guide, and it's not the end all be all. But what I help people do is interpret the milestones, the markers, the route map, all of those kinds of things to understand. Okay, you're going to go over the mountains here. How do we get into the vehicle that can traverse the mountains, right? So the other area that I am just about certified in is called root cause therapy.
Root cause therapy.
Right, right.
Thank you.
And it literally means getting to the root cause. And that phrase has been thrown around a lot lately, but really understand, you can't go out and just pull things up or snip off the top of the challenge, if you will. You have to pull it up by the root so that it can't resprout. And when we take somebody who has something in their chart that lends itself to a real challenge in their life, a real difficulty, if you give them a coping mechanism, then it has the potentiality to continue to sprout. But if we can get to the root of it and really pull it out from the first instance in their life, or if you believe in past lives or generational, pull out that challenge, that traumatic experience, then they can really understand the energy potential. So example, here's a great example I can give personally. So when I had my chart done in the constellational world, it was like, oh my gosh, talk about illumination. I've got a sun in the midheaven. I was born in July, just after noon. So, I mean, it's all about being seen, right? And I have a strong influence of Mercury and Gemini in my chart. You can't shut me up. I want to share with people. I want to teach. I want to guide. I want to do these things. But I had this root cause belief. Little girls don't say anything. Be quiet. You're to be seen and not heard. So when you continually program that in through your lifetime, and that's not meant as any disparaging comment of my childhood. I have wonderful parents and I had, encouragement, but there's that piece that it was like, you talk too much, go sit in the corner.
Yeah, we receive ideas culturally,
Yes.
even through osmosis, even if no one sits you down and says, little girls are seen and not heard. We all understand, especially as young people, our place.
Yeah.
And some of us stay there for way too long, if you ask me. But
absolutely. Absolutely. And when that's ingrained in us, built into us, and then you present a chart to somebody with the energy potential that says, no, you need to be heard, then there's that challenge. There's that friction.
Yeah.
So you've got somebody who's really straining at the bit to get out there, and yet they have this belief that's may even be subconsciously programmed in that you wonder why can't I ever make it out there? Right.
So I'd like to jump in and sort of respond if I could.
Yeah, please.
So thank you. Some people, upon having the realization, my voice wasn't honored as a child for whatever reasons, cultural, familial, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Let's just say they have the realization, I internalized that, and now I apply a pressure to myself, which keeps me from speaking, and the realization itself alone is enough for them to simply, by force of insight, the luminous quality of consciousness, shall we say, just allows them then to begin experiment, to begin speaking, hearing the voice. Now, other people, that's not enough, and this may go to prior experience, may go to the depth or the profundity of the conditioning. Let's say we have someone who's not only was very forcefully suppressed in their ability to speak and express themselves in the family environment, but through prior lifetimes, this pattern has unresolved. It's shown up, and let's say there's a strong connection to the South Node, indicating that they've brought this pattern to this lifetime. And so now we have astrology. It's showing us, okay, there's something here. There's something here. We know which way to sort of like, apply the leverage. We know where the fulcrum is. We know, we're gonna help. But it's not enough just to know. How do these therapies, how do these modalities, do they have you found in your journey more robust and capable tools? And is there anything you'd like to respond, like anything at all? Because I know we all encounter spectrums where like sometimes our advice is helpful and sometimes it's like they can't gain the traction. The people we want to help can't gain the traction. Yeah.
Well, and I think this goes to a word I've been, excuse me, using in other conversations with people is I think in the work that we do, we have to help our clients or those we serve find the recipe, right?
Mm,
So the recipe may be do a few sessions of root cause therapy to get to that unconscious root of what is
mm,
creating this dissension in your life, right?
mhm,
And then the other part of the recipe might be as I release that, I
mm,
might need some somatic work. I might need some
mm,
Reiki
mm.
work. I might need some
Somatic. Can
creativity.
you unpack that for people who might not
Yes,
like soma body? Is that, yeah,
body,
please.
right? Because we
Mm.
tend to intellectualize what
Oh,
we have
yeah.
going on, especially those of us with strong Mercury in our charts. We want to figure it all out, right? And
Hmm.
try to solve the puzzle in our heads, where it
Mm.
might be a trapped emotion that is
That's it.
physically in your body somewhere that needs a
That's it.
release.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And recognizing that each person's recipe is going to be different, not only as an individual,
Mm.
but in time in life. What recipe I
Hmm.
needed at
Hmm.
29
Hmm.
versus now at 60 is a
Mm.
completely different chapter in the cookbook, right?
Right, right. And
And
some of that information you may find in the chart too. So I can see
absolutely,
how these right away, how these therapies would be working together. But
absolutely.
you said a huge word, a big word in the I don't want to say psychotherapy industry, but I will. That's an industry, and we'll talk about psychotherapists like they're making a lot of money to keep people in a cycle potentially. So let's look at psychotherapy that's
Yes,
oriented to uh, getting into we know like Bessel van der Kolk taught us the
yes,
body holds everything. It's in there. The subconscious,
right there.
yeah.
Yep.
The subconscious isn't some like dimension in space out there where the
Oh,
blackness of our emotional pain goes. The subconscious is the body.
yes,
When you push something down from your experience because it's too traumatic to process in real time, you in essence, the danger of trauma, the problem inherent in trauma is that you're burying those feelings.
you're
You can't
adapting.
process them. But
You're adapting.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's an
And when you
adapt.
bury your feelings alive, they're going to zombie come up later and do the zombie things. And it's always ugly. It's always bad. They eat brains. So we don't like
Right.
that.
Well, and part of this training that I'm working through, it talks a lot about that, they say trauma, and that word has been used a lot lately, and we can touch on that as to why I think that is.
Mm-hmm.
But I also look at it as extreme or intense life events, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
sometimes you say the word trauma to somebody and somebody thinks of like something, like volcanic, and
Oh, right.
others it might
Right.
be just
Right.
being screamed at as a kid
Right.
for 5 years, right?
Even
So,
even something less seemingly
yes,
violent than that can be
yes,
very traumatic. The parents that left their
absolutely.
child to cry can
Yeah,
just be giving their poor child the impression like I'm not lovable. I've been
right.
abandoned. And these messages get internalized. Is it I want to say not too much here, but you said we can look at the definition of trauma if it's helpful. And I think it is because a lot of people think trauma. Well, I wasn't locked in a cage in the basement and, like
Mhm.
electric cattle prodded. I'm
No,
okay. But trauma, my working definition of trauma is anything that's too intense to process in real time.
and
Anything that's too intense. And so you take the excess, and in order to function, you bury it.
yep. And how the group that I'm doing this training under define it even further than that is it's not an event or a elongation of events, like,
Mm,
say childhood trauma over years.
mm,
It's an adaptation.
mm,
Trauma is an adaptation to cope. And what
mm,
happens is you have this mechanism where you're up here emotionally. Let's say you're terrified because you're experiencing something
mm,
in particular, right?
mm,
And instead of going through the full processing of that terror, as
mm,
you said, you shut it off. You get into
mm,
fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So
mm.
then you've learned that you can stay up here as long as you can shut it off and adapt. And so
Sort
then
of, but yeah, I do agree with you.
yeah,
Functionally, it works that way.
yes,
Not
functionally
well,
it
but
works that way.
right.
Right. And so you could look at certain things like one of the recurring messages in my head right now is Chiron. And
Mm,
so let's say you've got Chiron in eighth house or Scorpio. all about fear of betrayal, right? I should say all about, but potentially
No,
about fear of
that's a great
betrayal.
8 house Scorpio theme. I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at somebody with that marker in their chart and they come to you because they're having difficulty staying in relationships that are not abusive or rejective or whatever
Right.
words come
Right.
in with the situation, it's
Right.
like, well, wait a minute, you have a hypersensitivity to betrayal.
Mm,
So then let's take a look. So you avoid or you sabotage relationships so that you don't have to suffer that betrayal.
right.
So then let's look at maybe some root cause issues with that. And maybe you have a generational situation or a past life situation where you were killed because of a betrayal.
Of
Okay,
course.
so then that's a huge thing to unpack, right?
Of course.
But
Yeah,
again, this is a way
absolutely.
to use the chart to help understand the roadmap.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. So I'm hearing sort of in between the lines of what you're saying that at every step of the way, in the process of helping somebody work with um let's just say reclaiming themselves.
Mhm.
Because what seems to happen in the case of a lot of traumatic experiences that the part of our body which is affected, let's say locally, the part
Yes,
like I keep
somatic.
holding my heart. I'm always dealing with heart stuff, I can tell you. And that part of us, it becomes shut off in a way. It
Yes,
becomes
yes,
numbed, right?
yes.
We take the
Adapt.
pain, we put the
Yep,
pain in our shoulders, but we don't
yep.
want to have constant shoulder pain. So the
No,
mind goes, I'm going to take that offline for 20,
exactly.
30, 40 years. Yeah.
And that's that adaptation because you
Right.
don't want to
Right.
feel the pain. That's that protective mode that goes into play, right?
And I'm hearing you say that not only in that original diagnostic insight, but that at
Right.
every step of the healing, at every step of the healing journey, in every phase of a healing process, that there's valuable insight and information to be gleaned from the chart.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you could probably speak more fully to using like progressions or returns and things like that to help indicate, what might be, again, an energy potential. I
Right.
never speak in
Right.
absolute, well, I am speaking in
No.
an absolute now, but
I never speak in
I never speak in
absolutes. I
absolute.
always, no, no.
But I do use conditional language with my clients. You could, you
Course,
might,
of
it's a
course.
possibility
Yeah.
because people have a tendency to hear the absolute and then they
And they
think
do.
that's the
They
death
do.
sentence, right?
Yeah.
You know,
And I think good astrologers have a responsibility to kind of be a little over careful, push back against that tendency for their language to be
right,
kind of taken and like, oh, she said, I am like always like this. And then, someone can hear that and give so much power to the astrologer. It
right.
becomes, yeah.
Well, and we have
Um,
free will, I mean, there's that piece in there. Again, I have that strong Mercurian, Gemini, Sun stuff that says, get out there and talk.
right,
Maybe my
right,
free will says, not
right.
today,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
I
Absolutely.
think that's
I was
important.
just talking about these it's so interesting how themes repeat. You'd be talking and have the same conversations in a couple of days and it's all, especially because a lot of us is so tied in the community of live sky and constellational astrologers is so tuned into what's happening on that becomes such a conscious level of awareness. Amazing.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um but yeah, yeah, we where was I gonna go? I was thinking that you see I'm going back to astrological benefit at every
Yeah,
stage.
please.
I'm not gonna get lost in the serendipity and the synchronicities and the kismet, but it is neat how these keep coming up because I think when you're looking at a healing process, having a map a trustworthy map is amazing. And the problem with just talking to people and getting a sort of verbal, like the kind of therapeutic modalities that, like, let's just say we're not incorporating astrology at all. We're just
Mhm.
not, we're just, we're talking about, let's just say you go, um, let's say you go to the doctor and you're having some anxiety. Well,
Mhm.
they don't care that Mercury's square Uranus in your natal chart. They're never going to ask. They're never going to care. They're going to give you the corporate pharmaceutical pill
Right.
for anxiety that they get the most personal payout from prescribing, most likely. Like, let's be honest. And that leaves a sort of chasm of gray area between like medicine as it's practiced today, this sort of
Mhm.
like, this allopathy, this institutionally approved allopathic methodology that looks at astrology as woo woo.
Mhm.
Don't we won't go down that rabbit hole
Yeah, you and I
either.
have agreed we're not going there.
No, we won't go there. But there's so much gray area between like medicine as it's practiced today and even just with the introduction of astrology, if you're going to look at, and I'm not, it doesn't have to be sidereal, it doesn't have to be Tibetan, I
Right.
don't care. I'm just saying, um, even just the introduction of that kind of like those milestones and that map,
Well,
it can create in almost any modality,
yes.
almost any healing modality, greater and greater efficiency. Like,
Well, in taking the example you gave of the person with anxiety, goes to the allopathic doctor. And again, I came from mainstream medicine education. There are places and times, but my
mhm, mhm,
goal
mhm.
is to show people ways to bring these things together, right?
Yeah,
So you go to the doc says, well, here's your prescription, go home and feel better, right? But if you have somebody not only with that square situation going on, but let's say they have an orophotography done, they find out their throat chakra is blocked, and then you have the conversation with the wellness coach or somebody who can chat with you about this, and you find out they have to do some big presentation in front of a bunch of people. Well, there's no pill that is the best
mm-mm,
route for that. You
mm,
might want to help them unpack what it is that's creating the anxiety of getting in front of somebody that's blocking their throat chakra. So you
mm,
might do some integrative work on the throat chakra. You might talk to their Mercury a little bit, have some guided imagery work with Mercury to help open that up, to be able to
right.
communicate. Maybe there's a compromised Leo being out in the front of everybody,
Yeah,
all sorts of
yeah,
ways that you can bring these pieces together to give somebody a nice, beautiful, well-rounded approach rather than pop a pill and just mask it, right?
right. And the somatic dimension of just somatic modalities, any therapeutic modality, any healing sort of treatment, and there are countless, because natural, Aboriginal and Indigenous people have always done this. This is so deep in our archaic mind, but the
Mhm.
somatic approach is, seems to be necessary. We don't seem to be able to think our way, and this may be a problem too with like, it's not just psychiatry but psychotherapy. We talked already about people just keeping people in loops. I know people who've been in therapy 30, 40 years, hasn't
Yep,
done anything meaningful for them. They love their therapist, it's great, I'm glad for them, but
right.
it hasn't changed the behavior in a meaningful way.
Well, in another practitioner and I that does more like coaching type work, we were talking about the concept of neuroplasticity. And I don't want to get into all the details, but the gist of it is
Mm,
it's a language wiring of the brain. And if you
yeah.
consistently spend all this time talking about the challenges, the dissension, the trauma, the
Mhm,
difficulty, you just
mhm.
constantly embed that, just like learning a language. It
Oh yeah,
becomes
yeah,
inherently, and
yeah.
that's how you stay in the
Right,
psychiatrist's
right,
office, right?
right.
So
Talking your
let's
way
turn
around
it.
it, you're reinforcing it.
Yes. So
Even
how do
even
we
people
turn
when they have EMDR or therapies that
it?
actually
Yes.
they are somatic, they get in there. You can re-traumatize it. It's like
Yes.
it's such a delicate balance
It is.
to
Ooh.
walk for people who want to become able to be meaningful healers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And 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 somatic approaches to the root cause.
Mm-hmm.
I know
Huge.
you said you just got like you're just getting certified in the root cause. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure like what you're like, to what depth you're really familiar with all this, but I'm really curious. It might seem like a silly question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What do you do once you found the root cause? Let's say, I have problems, and I'll just use an example from my own life because I don't really feel like inventing anything. I've always had problems with older men and feeling a little bit like, the expression of authority between men is just somehow problematic.
Mm-hmm. A
Now I
trust.
could say this culture, I could say toxic
Sure.
masculinity, but I could look inwardly and I could look to my childhood and I could say, well, I experienced, I experienced, I had experiences with my dad in my early life that caused me to develop the ideas. Again, I'm not lovable. I deserve that. Something's wrong with me. So,
Mm-hmm.
okay. And here's my question. Once we've discovered the root cause, once we're not blaming society, once we're not saying something's wrong with everything else, all these men in my life, it's not me, but all these men, once we discover, oh, wow, okay, so I have a traumatic in my body, a thing. How do we resolve that? What does that look like? Somatic's a great word, but what do we
Yeah.
do with that?
So how we work with that, and I'm going to tie this back to the astrology after I explain the process because I think it really is relevant now.
Mm-hmm.
And so how we do this is we to isolate even what our limiting beliefs are,
Mm-hmm.
we use muscle testing in the
Okay.
process. So
Yeah.
for those who don't know, your unconscious mind holds within your body messages. And I can say, like you just told me, I have difficulty trusting men in authoritative positions. I'm just going to
Mm-hmm.
apply it to that. You know that from the chin up, right? You know that intellectually.
Mm-hmm.
But let's say when we muscle test that, and there's different processes, I'm not going to belabor that, but there's different ways that the body's going to tell you if that is a true belief.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah,
So, and
yeah.
it's interesting, certain things that'll come up that you go, oh, I didn't realize that that is a limiting belief. Or, wow, I always thought I was limited by that. But let's use your scenario. I have
Mm-hmm.
difficulty trusting men in authoritative positions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or actually, the way you say it is, I trust men in authority. Let's just keep it that simple. And then
Sure,
we
sure,
wait for the
sure.
body to say, do a yes or a no.
Right, right, right.
Then what we do is we go into a hyper relaxed sort of pseudo theta state where we're working with the unconscious mind higher self.
Sure. Can
And
you
what
unpack theta for the people?
actually I can do it just a tiny bit because I'm not trained in theta, but it's a brain state where you're in a hyper relaxed,
Mm-hmm.
non
Mm-hmm.
cognitive logical state,
That's
right?
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dreams,
Dream state.
hypnotization,
Yeah.
self-hypnotization, deep meditation,
Right.
watching TV,
Yeah.
interestingly enough. All these will take you into theta, the
Theta.
theta spectrum of brainwave activity. Thank you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we do that in a way where the client recognizes they're still in charge. If something comes up where you're like, nope, you can come right out, right?
Oh, yeah.
So we always impress that. But what we do is we work in that state and we ask the client to go back to the root cause. When healed, will consciously solve the problem, basically. But from this
Can
unconscious.
you say that again? Can you say that again? Go back
So
to the root cause when healed? I'm
yes.
sorry.
So when we process this root cause event, that it will become a consciously healed result in essence, right?
Okay,
So
yeah.
again, we'll take your example. I would say, okay, Michael, if we were to look, in the past, would this be before during or after your birth? Now, I'm asking your unconscious mind this question.
Yeah, sure.
Because
So
you
this
can
would
sit
be a
there and say
muscle
it was,
testing question, or
no, it's literally in that hyper relaxed
it would
pseudo
just,
theta state.
oh, and this is a
Yeah,
theta question.
right. Because you might say, yeah, it was my dad, but your
Yeah.
unconscious mind
Yeah,
didn't know it was
yeah.
4 generations ago.
Right.
So then we use timeline work, and people who do NLP and stuff will recognize that. But we have you sink into that event
Mm,
and go through the process of describing the event, but focus on the emotions
mm,
and where you're feeling them.
right.
So let's say you're feeling
So
anxiety.
that's a present moment thing where I'm feeling
Yes,
emotions in my body is a present moment
right,
thing. So we need
right,
an anchor to the present moment. So when we go back in our past, we're not re-traumatizing ourselves.
right.
I just want
So
to,
then,
yeah.
yes, yes. So then I have you say, so let's say you say it's anxiety, and okay, Michael, where are you feeling that anxiety? I'm feeling it in my heart. And let's keep it simple. That's the
Oh,
only place.
sure. Yeah, yeah.
On a scale of 10, how intense is it? And most of the
Mm.
time you're 8, 9, 10. Sometimes people say 11. And then
Um,
I'll ask you if it's okay if we turn that emotion up in
mm,
intensity, like a volume button. Now, some
mhm.
people will pendulate where you'll turn it up, bring it back down, but you have to watch your client, understand where they are,
Yeah,
and create an island of safety for people
yeah.
who are extremely traumatized, right? They have to
Sure.
know they're safe. So for scenario simplicity, we turn it up, turn it up, turn it up. And you have the person somatically process it. If you're feeling it in your heart, you might start shaking, or you might,
Yeah,
tremor
shaking.
a little
That's a
bit, or you
huge
might
word.
cry, or you
Yeah,
might, flap your arms, you might stomp your,
sure, sure,
whatever
sure.
it is to physically,
Right, right.
somatically process it through the body.
Oh, yeah,
And we
yeah,
have you bring it down to where it completely dissipates in that unconscious mind theta type state.
yeah.
Then I ask you, from the perspective of this event, what
Mm,
is the truth of the event? Because you've
mm.
created a truth in your present moment mind, but you'll see the truth of the event in a different way when you've processed that related emotion, right?
Yeah, that's
Then you have a
interesting. And it
learning,
brings it to the present. It brings
right?
like now it's like, well, what is it now?
Right.
It's
And we
not
do a whole
right.
process that brings you back to the present and have you
Yeah.
pull all the events from the root event to the present to clear that. And if there's
Hmm.
multiple emotions, we make sure we get all of them, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So now, how does that tie into now and what's going on in the sky?
Mm.
And you and I were talking a little bit about Uranus being in Aries, getting ready to ingress into Taurus.
Uh,
And I really think that this wiring, Uranus,
right.
of the self, Aries, is creating this call for us to really be authentically who we are out in the world, the collective, Uranus.
Hmm.
And it's creating some not dissension, but friction, this staticky feel in a lot of people. And why do I always feel like I can't stand out on stage and talk to somebody? I'm tired of dealing with this. I
Mm,
feel pushed to do this. I have to
mm,
deal with this, right? So I
mhm.
think that's why some of these trauma stories, these intense life events, ACEs, as you mentioned earlier, are
Mm.
coming up for people because people want to be authentically who they are.
Right, right, right. And when we have part of us that's offline, when we have part of us that's unresolved in its healing journey, we can't really be living out of the highest energetic potentials that we have
Right.
within our being. We're living out of somewhat lower potentials. And the feeling of that is very frustrating to people. It's very
Yes.
frustrating to people. And I think a lot of people, and almost everyone I've ever met, whether they know how to ask or they know that they should, or they, whatever state, whatever condition they're in. I've worked in alternative medicine and healing, and yeah, I wouldn't call it healthcare because big powerful people with private security forces get grumpy when you use the term healthcare. They kind of have that trademarked, but um, what I think people want to know, the one thing is like, how do I heal? You
Yes.
know, we
How
have
do I
all
feel
these.
whole?
Yeah, like what do I do? Like what is the action of healing? Like am I stuck with this sort of psychological kind of, it feels like a sort of like psychological cancer forever? No. How do I access that, and accessing it, how do I release it? How do
Right.
I make space? How do I bring those things back online? Those parts of my body, my shoulders, my back, the backs of my thighs,
Yeah.
calves, all that anywhere.
And to feel safe
Um,
in doing it. And I think that's some of the biggest issues and challenges people find is they know they need something. They
right.
know they want to trust somebody, but geez, if
Mhm.
you've got Chiron eighth house or Scorpio,
Mm.
good
Yeah.
luck, right? You
Sure.
know,
Sure.
so that's where your astrologer can come in and say, okay, you may have some challenges. You have the potential to feel like you can't trust people. So
Right.
let's see how we can unpack that for you. And I
Have
also
you? Yeah. Oh, please go ahead. Please
I was going to
continue.
say, I think Chiron being in Pisces right now is really creating that level of everybody feeling all the suffering and the empathy need and the
Yeah.
highly sensitive people and
Oh, very.
everybody's feeling it, right?
Yeah.
Chiron calls for us to feel the suffering of everybody, in Pisces.
In Pisces, yeah,
In
yeah, more
Pisces,
so in Pisces than anywhere
yes.
else, I would say. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yes, for
Fair,
sure.
fair.
Yeah. So it's like, how do you create that space where you can have empathic understanding, but you don't embody it? Be the observer, not the
Mm,
absorber.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's the main mistake I see people making when they try to sort of like self-therapize or apply modalities to themselves. Like if someone's listening to this thinking like, Eureka, it's just
Yeah,
in my body. I just took it offline. Now I have to like get in there and get it out. Like, be careful with that. You
right,
really can't. There's volatile material in there, and you don't know how deep it goes.
right.
So being careful, that's one thing. Having tools, that's one thing. But you touched on something that I keep going back to because I didn't know we were going to talk about this today, but we're going to talk about this today, which is shaking practice.
I was thinking
Because
about
I
that.
already said that indigenous and aboriginal and archaic and actual peoples, not modern socialized peoples, but archaic and then just real people, for time out of mind have had ritualized through dance or spontaneous
Mhm.
movement. In the Taoist community, there's like practices like Yi Gong, spontaneous, a
Rhythm stance, that's another one.
spontaneous movements
Mhm.
and ecstatic dance. Yeah.
Yep.
So depending on the nature of what it was, people have always had practices to get into the body, things that would probably look pretty weird to most of us today because we're rigid and
Our programming.
our
Hmm.
programming is pure programming. There's nothing wrong with seeing people heal, but we're programmed in certain ways. So
Well, I'm going to interject here to something that
go
goes
ahead, go
right
ahead.
with
Yeah,
this.
because I
So
I
you're
know where I'm
talking,
going with this, and there's a couple ways to get there.
well, and you talked about, the ancient cultures in using the body shaking or using the body to
Movement,
the emotion.
shaking, yeah.
What's the first thing a dog does when it gets up? It
Oh,
shakes, and then
especially if it's been in a fight. A dog
yes,
who's just been traumatized,
yes,
guaranteed you'll see them shake it off.
yeah,
Yeah, every
yeah,
time.
exactly. And that's the one thing I also love about the organization under which I'm doing this training is they have a phrase that is their foundational phrase, and it's all is welcome here.
Mm,
So if you need to shake in a session, if you need to stamp your feet, you need to
mhm,
sing, you
mhm,
need to do
mhm,
whatever to move that energy, that
mhm,
emotion
mhm.
somatically through the
Right,
body,
right, right,
do it.
right,
We
right,
welcome
right.
it,
Yeah,
you
that's
know?
great. That's great that there's room for that and there's a
Absolutely.
language for that and it's a language of release and healing. Because a lot of times that's really what happens. I mean, whether you see it in the Shiva tradition, in the Kundalini tradition, and in all of the expressions of the shamanic traditions, whether it's like bush people in Africa or Australia, they all have a dedicated shaking practice. They have a healing practice, and they just go out and they'll
Yep,
just shake around a fire. They'll just
yep,
dance, but it starts with spirals. The
yep.
Taoists are always like this, but other people, natural people I've talked to about their healing practices, they talk about spirals too. Sifu Jenny Lamb.
Hmm.
Sifu, Sifu, Jenny Lamb, Lamb, has she's a brilliant kung fu teacher, but she teaches Taoist soft arts, internal arts, and she has, and I think you can still find this out there. For a lot of people who just may want to try a modality at home and not really go in and invest in a therapeutic relationship with somebody, for a lot of reasons, people may or
Mhm.
may not want to do that. I
Sure.
want to promote your work, Julie, but
Oh,
I
but
also
people
want to
need
give
to
people,
explore.
yeah,
People
I
need
want to
to
give people
explore.
alternatives.
Yeah,
Sifu Jenny
absolutely.
Lamb has a spontaneous movement practice, like what it's called Yi Gong, Y-I hyphen Gong, and a gong is just a discipline, something
Hmm.
that takes like an effort. It's the same
Hmm.
word as kung in kung fu. It means you're doing a discipline. And yi means spontaneous. So this is a Taoist exercise. It's like a formless, spontaneous form. So
Hmm.
you get into a certain physical position, and the method that she uses is to raise the heels off the floor. You can do this
Hmm.
now. Everyone can do this now, and just kind of shake your heels, shake your like let your toes be on the floor, but just let your knees kind of bounce and
I'm
shake your
doing it.
heels,
Yeah.
and just like this is a stability. This like disturbs the roots, the connection to the earth, and any time we've been in a situation that represents a need to heal,
Yep.
this will trigger it. This
Yep.
instability will be like, holy shit. So this can take you to very, very compartmentalized, very scared places within your psyche. I want to caution this just because it's called Yi Gong and Jenny seems gentle, like careful. But there
Yeah.
are ways to do this. And in every culture, you see what you're talking about, this understanding that it's in the body.
Yes.
It's
Hmm.
in the body, and we have to get it out of the body if we
Yep.
want to be free of it. It's not
And,
going to
and
go away, right, by
yeah, and
changing our
it,
mind.
yes. And, and it even goes to, this is going to be a rewind here. So I did food service for years while I was in college. I put, food on the table,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And if we had frustration or a difficult day,
Yeah.
our manager would say, go in the walk-in refrigerator and just scream because
Scream,
nobody can
scream
hear
it
you in
out.
there, right?
That's right.
But you got rid of it, you know.
Yeah. Screaming.
But I
Screaming's a
want to
good
go back
therapy too
to,
for release. Yeah.
yeah, and I want to go back to, and again, disclaimers, we're not physicians, we're not medical providers, we're not giving you treatment, seek
Mm-hmm.
out a
Mm-hmm.
licensed professional if you choose to go down these roads.
That's right.
But one of the things that came across my purview, and I used it once already, was this inner island of safety. So when you feel like you want to kind of explore this a little bit, make sure you set yourself an inner island of safety. And what do I mean by that? It could be a breathing process where you breathe in slowly, hold, exhale slowly. But for somebody who may have had an experience of being suffocated or near suffocated,
Oh yeah.
that may not feel safe.
Yeah.
Or place your hand on your heart and your hand on your belly. But
Mm.
for somebody, that may not feel safe because they may
Right.
have been held down.
Yeah.
For others, it may be an imagery thing. Think
Yeah.
of the most wonderful, peaceful, serene place you could be, whether it's real or imagined. That may be your inner island of safety. So when the
Yeah.
release feels like it's too much, just keep telling yourself, I am safe and I'm going to my inner island of safety.
Mm.
And you can use that process as a way to reprogram, that
Mm-hmm.
neuroplastic
Mm-hmm.
thing we talked about
Mm-hmm.
earlier, but give the emotion a chance to do its thing, but carefully, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
Because
think that's important.
thank you so much for that. Yeah, the gentleness and the carefulness of it is, I think, where I personally see people kind of they want to heal. They get very excited to heal, and they kind of go in too hard. Like
Well, we're an instant gratification society these days. We want it quick and we want it now, but we're
it's
undoing
brilliant.
potentially lifetimes of programming.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
you have to give yourself some grace in that process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And even learning about yourself through the astrological chart, right? So let's just say, I mean, I had a lovely lady that came to me and she was in her mid 70s, I think. And I opened up the world of the constellational chart to her at a very simple level.
Mm-hmm.
And we went through and answered some questions and stuff. And she later sent me an email that says, I finally understand who I really am
Yeah.
and why.
Yeah.
And I said, that's beautiful. And give yourself time to let that grow.
Uh,
It's you're reacquainting yourself with yourself in a different light. So again, there goes back that grace and that,
yeah.
just allow
Gentle.
ease into it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think we as practitioners have to be mindful of that as well. When we
Mm.
share
There's
these
so much, there's
people.
so much there, not to the practitioners being mindful, but to what you were saying about
Yeah.
how it seems like something that we as practitioners would just be like, oh yeah, yeah, it's like that. It's great. But you're saying, no, it's a process, and as a process, it's a sacred process of
Yes,
emergence, and we need to hold it like one. And I thank you
absolutely.
for that. That's because
Yeah.
I even, I think we all get a little bit just you see something over and over, like people,
Mhm.
applying this stuff or healing, and it just gets to be like, yeah, that's what happens. But you're
Well,
right.
go back to the Mercury square Uranus. So the first time you may be sharing that with a client, and they have some insight and understanding as to why or these energy potentials that keep showing up.
Mm,
But now there's got to be time to understand. It's like, no, that's who I am. And I have to be, it's like, no,
right.
you have energy potential for now understanding what you've been experiencing.
Mm,
And how can I embrace it?
right. 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 Because none of this is really actually about getting the parts of us that we don't like out.
No.
It's really about reclaiming,
And
making
welcome.
room for what's actually there,
Right.
which is our whole or holistic selves.
Yeah. And how would you talk to that child you?
Mm.
This came up in a discussion I was having with some other colleagues earlier
Wow,
about
yeah,
the
that's
terms
yeah,
good enough, right? And I'm not good enough to XYZ.
yeah,
And we look at that and you go, okay, did you give it your best effort? Think about when you were, say, a 5-year-old kid learning to ride your bicycle for the first time.
uh,
And now you as the adult are looking at that 5-year-old. Would
right,
you yell at that kid for not being
right,
good enough to
right,
ride the
right,
bike?
yeah,
No
right. I
normal
mean,
parent would ever do that. So why do
right.
we do that to ourselves?
Right, right, right.
So
There's
that's
some sort
embracing.
of like it
It's the
it does it
embracing.
triggers some sort of like very dark mechanism in the brain, but not to answer the question rationally, just to say that I totally agree. It's a
Yeah.
self-defeating habit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you embrace these things that come into your story, your chart, your whatever it is that you're exploring to understand the who you are?
Yeah.
I'm a Mercury square Uranus. Okay, how do I embrace that? How do I work
Right.
with
Right.
it? Right?
Right.
I
Yeah,
mean, I
and
have a retrograde Saturn fifth house Capricorn. What does that mean to Julie? Restrictions on how she can play and express herself. She always
yeah.
has to do the
Yeah.
work before she can play.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I understand that now. So I
Right.
find myself after having my second Saturn return, triggered
Yeah.
3 times retrograde, I
Yeah.
start, I step back, I go, does this play have to be structured first off? Or can it just be spontaneous?
Yeah.
Or does this play require that I get all the work done before I can go play? I am also a Virgo ascending. All the check
Sure.
boxes have to be done,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
So
And for
this
every
gives you
person, those answers might be different.
exactly. And this gives you an idea of how am I working and embracing what I find could be challenging energy potentials. It's like, no, now I
Mm,
have a different relationship with it. Go
yeah.
color outside the lines. Nobody's
Yeah.
going to care. Your
No.
Virgo ascending might have a little problem with it, but that's how you embrace understanding the
Yeah.
energy. Don't get too
Yeah.
perfectionistic, right?
Sure. Sure. And we can even, once we develop that sort of like healing relationship with ourselves or tap into our own healing power, once we realize that when we start doing these things, certain conditions follow, certain
Yes.
effects follow these causes that we can start to pull the thread of those things so that even the difficult things we might have to do, we can do them in a mindful way, in a
Right.
graceful way, staying it with our insight, and say, well, if something comes up, oh yeah, what is that? I'm going to pull that thread and see
Mhm.
what's down there. Where does that lead? If I follow it, like you were talking about NLP timelines, going
Mhm.
back, going back to like causal,
Right.
causal events to just even to the whole timeline, to the whole, that just where did this start? And
Oh, and we use future work too. If we were to take a look at a future event, again, in that hyper relaxed theta type state,
mhm.
would it be months or years in the future? I had one person go 33 years in the future
Okay,
and started to see some challenging things. So we cleaned that up from the root cause piece of it. And then went back to the future, and,
sure.
it was an amazing unfolding. And
Yeah,
what would be really magical is if we, through that process, could isolate an approximate time frame in the 33 years. Let's go look at that progress chart, see what's
yeah,
going on,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Not
yeah,
in a
yeah.
predictive. There's my disclaimer. I don't do
No, no,
predictive
no.
stuff because free will is an amazing thing. I might say,
Hmm.
okay, potentials show you may have a year that is focused on. So
Hmm.
just be aware that that could be a possibility, right? But I'm not one
Yeah,
to say, okay, your bank account's going to do this, you're going to have a divorce, and you're going to meet 3 new people. Nah,
yeah. People wish that's how astrology
I
works.
know.
They want it to work that way. And they want, they don't always realize it, but what they want is to realize that they don't have responsibility for their own
Right,
lives, that it's all
right,
just a bunch of patterns, and they're going to only have to wait till age 38 when tall, dark, and handsome walks into their
right,
life. And that's just not how anything we know works. So
right,
let's
right,
toss
right,
that out the window.
right. Yeah, I mean, and you can use it to say this may be a year of self-reflection and self-growth. So you may
Mm,
not find that you're creating a lot of opportunity for relationships, but that
mhm.
doesn't mean that if a relationship comes in the door that really speaks to you, that you should
Oh,
go,
yeah.
nope, this is my year for this,
Oh
kind of.
yeah, that's it. That's it.
Yeah,
Astrology has, like everything else, has its limitations. But when we do bring it in, and you put it in its appropriate place, and we don't give it too much power,
right.
but we keep it in its place, and we use it to inform our healing work.
Yes.
It's the
Yes.
it's not that astrology isn't the healing work. I've just come to look at astrology as more of a, mm, I don't want to reduce it to a diagnostic, because it's way more than that. But it informs and works with other modalities. Like, you need ways of getting into uh people's uh, people's diets, people's lifestyles. If you want to make meaningful healing change, in a lot of
Yes.
cases, you need access to, you can't, as an astrologer, I mean, sure, like, people come to me because they know I speak the language of a complicated symbol set. And when I look at their chart, I'm going to be able to interpret to them, but they don't come to me and just naturally and automatically give me access to their diet and lifestyle. Like, if I were to
Right.
tell them, oh, you have Mercury square Uranus, and that anxiety is, it's going to get muscular. You should eat more bananas. Like, half of them are going. That's where astrology loses people, where it gets
Right.
woo woo right away. Now, I mean, that might make sense to you, potassium and the nervous
Yeah.
condition of a tense system, but that's not going to make sense to everyone. So, I don't know where I'm going with that, but what I started to say, what I intended to start to say, was was that what we can do with astrology is keep it in its right and good place, and when it's there, it just illuminates
Right.
everything. Like,
I had this vision, now I'm going to date myself here, right? I had this
mhm.
vision of opening up the big paper map,
Oh
right?
yeah,
You open up this paper map and
road
there's
trip,
all these roads and there's all these different ways, but am I going
right?
to take the Toyota? Am I going to take the Ford? Am I going to do it on the water? Am I going to do it on foot? Am I going to do,
Hmm.
so you have this map of
Right,
a myriad of
right, right,
possibilities.
right.
And there
Which
may be
which
something
is an
that
analogy for the chart, if anyone
That's
out there can
exactly, yeah.
follow.
I'm using that as a metaphor for the chart. And so let's say I see the energy potential of taking a trip over the mountains,
Mhm.
and I know I'm going to do it on foot.
Mm,
I have some challenges in terms of getting physically conditioned. So
mhm.
maybe I'll go take and talk to a sports medicine
Right,
conditioner, or
right,
maybe I'll talk to an integrative health nurse that might give me
right,
some nutritional support ideas, or
right.
an herbalist. I know that the chart says that there's something about going over the mountains in there,
Yeah.
potential, And I really want to do that, but I may need others help me get the tools to do it in the most effective way.
That's it. That's it. Nothing is just standalone panacea, one modality to cure them all. That it doesn't exist. Not even, I mean, everything just has its limitations. It's literally part of being a thing.
Yeah, yeah,
That so,
yeah.
not to get philosophical about it all, but that's sort of where that stops for me. So the question though, what then, begins is well, how do we inform our other more like healing modalities with our astrological
You know,
knowledge?
one of the ways in the door, which is kind of funny, is you talk to anybody in the mainstream healthcare system, especially if they work in emergency rooms, intense areas. You ask them, hey, how's it like? What's it like during a full moon? Everybody knows that story, right? Oh, yeah, it's crazy during a full moon. Well, and there's your door, right? There's a way
Mm.
in some regards. The other thing
Yeah,
is
yeah.
to invite a practitioner to explore for themselves.
Yeah, yeah, we
You
have
know,
to. We have to. It has to be a personal journey. No
absolutely.
one can browbeat anyone into an understanding
Mm-mm.
that's theirs. Not, like if I browbeat someone into an understanding until they adopt my understanding, that's not their understanding,
No,
it's mine. And
no.
understanding, genuine understanding takes in almost every case time, and with astrology it just takes, I mean, it's a journey.
Oh,
And that's the beautiful thing about it is it's
yeah,
such a profound journey. But
absolutely. Well, and the kind of the triangle foundation I work under is anybody that I serve or bring my work to, it must
hmm,
also have a preservation of client autonomy,
hmm,
client agency, and orient towards solution.
hmm.
That is my
That's it.
foundational perspective is
Autonomy,
client
agency, and
and oriented towards
meaningful
solution. Yes.
solutions.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's a
Yeah.
brilliant metric. That's a
Yeah.
brilliant metric.
And the agency and the autonomy come first because the client is the expert in understanding what the solution entails.
Themselves. They're the expert
They're
on
their own
themselves.
expert. I'm merely the person holding the lamp up to the map.
That's the map, right? They're the territory and they have the final word in
Right.
every instance. But most people, they do find that astrology helps. Like, I mean, competent astrology, good astrology. Most people, like, I don't hardly talk to anyone skeptical. I mean, I've done charts for people who are like, yeah, right, kid, show me. And I'll be like,
Okay.
sounds like a Virgo thing to say. And, we'll take it from there. And I've, yeah, I'm not trying to toot my own horn. I'm just saying I've dealt with those situations. I'm
Of course.
comfortable. I'm comfortable there. But I think we're just still just barely scratching the surface when it comes to um, let's say, for example, it would be easier for me to list some modalities that astrology like couldn't inform. And even if you're thinking about like, oh, okay, like let's take like allopathy, something, it's just totally divorced from astrology, major invasive therapy.
Mhm.
Um, I'll tell you, I almost had my right leg amputated, and so this goes back to the Tibetan, but in the Tibetan, there's an understanding that the life force, the nexus of the life force in your body, the sort of the strong and potent life force, it moves around. It makes a
Mhm.
circulation through your system, and it does this in a lunar cycle. And it's a full moon, the what they call the law, the high energy, the law energy is up in
Mhm.
your head. And at a new moon, it's low in the body. But they caution against surgeries. If you have your leg amputated while your law is like you're as good as dead. So they would look at that and say, well, we have to understand the circulation of this patient's vital force before we do this, major invasive surgery. So I failed to find even one
Yeah.
genuine healing modality that actually astrology can't
Support.
inform. and
Inform,
support
absolutely.
and improve.
And it's interesting because this could be a whole nother dialogue, but one
Yeah.
of the other areas, you and I've talked about it, is working on people's personal cycles in understanding. So in other words, we have a new moon, a full moon, that cycle that happens for the
Mhm, mhm,
collective. But
mhm,
what is your personal new moon? Because I'll have people
mhm,
say, God, I don't
mhm,
always feel that way during the new moon. It's
mhm,
like, well,
mhm.
let's see when the moon circulates back to its natal position. I mean, into the position in the chart that's relative to your natal moon. Like I'm 5 degrees Taurus, let's say.
So the phase, the lunar
Well,
phase in a person's birth cycle is what you're talking
I'm
about?
looking at it from two different perspectives. So
Mm.
either the actual return, if you will. So like for me, 5 degrees Taurus, every time the moon comes back to 5 degrees Taurus, that's my personal new moon.
Oh, okay.
But
I
let's
get
say I
that.
was born at a first quarter moon. So if people want to look at it during phase, every time the moon, the collective moon is in the first quarter phase, that's
Mm.
your personal new moon because it's relative to the phase that was in effect at your chart, right?
Right.
So helping
Yeah,
people
yeah.
tune in, if you keep saying, well, God, I always wondered why I don't feel the same that everybody's supposed to feel
Right,
during the
right.
new moon or the
Yeah,
full moon, whatever. So I help people look at that and explore that and do it in a way that you kind of just tune into your rhythms, and let's track it over, say, 3 or 4 cycles and see what
right.
you feel.
Yeah,
And then if you find out that you actually feel the new moon energy at your personal new moon phase, how can you honor that?
yeah.
Because again, that goes back to that energy
Right,
potential.
right,
Potential is
right.
there for you to be quiet and reflective and take that time to go within because
Yeah.
that's what's more natural for you.
Yeah. And I love that because there's really no like textbook thinking on that. There's no like institutional party line or some sort of I don't know, general consensus. So it's
Right.
a personal journey, which is
Sure.
what half of this, I mean, at least half of this is anyway. Pure personal journey. It's just between
Absolutely. Well, and
people
that
and the
triggered, and I'll just
cosmos.
kind of tie this up a little tiny bit,
Mhm,
but there was
mhm,
a lady that did her PhD studies looking at people's personal cycles. And she looked at it from the women's cycle, the natural menstrual cycle, and looking at different earthbound cultures, as she called it, and how they
mhm,
honored
mhm,
those natural cycles, and then how it extrapolated into the community
mhm,
when there was a sacred retreat
mhm,
allowed to be honored at
mhm.
that time.
Right,
So it's like their personal new moon, if you will.
right, right,
And there
right.
was a whole series of things she did through this study. And
Yeah.
it goes back to honoring our natural rhythmic cycles,
Mm.
and it even goes to that somatic release. If you're not honoring what your body needs at that
Right.
time
Yeah.
energetically,
Right.
you have a potentiality to become ill or to have issues or dis-ease, right?
That's it. That's it. Out of alignment with the bigger flow, it creates disharmony, dis-ease.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think helping people see that in themselves, I think would go a long way toward ongoing well-being.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. It's true. I almost forget because, I've been sort of living in the kind of flow with these cycles, kind of watching the moon. I've got my astrology software even when I can't see the stars and the planets. And it's like,
Mhm.
um, for people without that to be connected to their own, well, it's an external reflection of their own internal natural rhythms.
Right.
They're external natural rhythms.
Yeah,
But there's
exactly.
only one reality. There's the inner world, and the rhythms of the inner world are connected to the
Right.
rhythms of the outer world. And so, um, yeah, I just see that as almost like a miraculous discovery in new people, where for people like you and I, it's almost like I almost have to like, oh yeah, it is how it works. I'm so used to it, I don't even think
Right.
about it. It's just, of
Right.
course we have to be in alignment. Of course we have to be mindful of this. Of course, anytime I'm looking at any sort of important procedure, geez, medical or otherwise, I'm going to
Yep.
take the astrology of the time into account.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I'm sure you can relate being another seasoned professional.
It's important, you know. But I'm going to put a nice little bow on this,
That's
and
good. Yeah, you read my mind. We're
yeah,
there.
yeah,
We're there.
and go back to Uranus, that call for us to be our authentic self.
Yeah.
And what the metaphor I love to use is we all come into this world tuned to a note,
Tune to a note.
tuned to a note. And if each one of us sings the note that is authentically ours,
Hmm.
symphony is in harmony.
That's it. I like that. No one has the responsibility for the whole thing, like a
Right,
bell choir.
right.
All you have to do, you have one thing to do. No.
Yeah, seriously. But if we're tuned to C major and you come in singing B flat minor,
This doesn't work.
and you come in and you come in, you know, and that's what this is, a call for us to be authentically who we feel and believe we truly are, rather than what others expect us to be.
Yeah.
I think that's
Yeah.
a call now. I think this
Yeah.
is something we have to do
Yeah.
as we
Yeah.
transcend all of the crazy that's going on in the world. We have to sing our authentic note. We have to.
Yeah, yeah. And in a way, we always did. It's not like, oh, now we must. It's like, no, this is how life works. And how do you think we got here? Well, we
Right.
stopped. We
Right.
stopped singing our authentic note. And there's, you know, however you choose to look at it, that wasn't to disagree or to correct or to, no, it's
No, I
a
understand.
total agreement. Yeah, thank
Yeah.
you, thank you.
Yeah.
And it's a perfect bow to put on a very beautiful conversation. We're about at an hour, and I think I'd like to wrap this up rather than try and, you know, take it on or put a final pin in a point. I think it's been an absolute joy to talk to you.
You as well, my friend, as it is always. Um,
Always. Thank you.
if
Thank you.
people want to
Always
connect
good
with
to
me,
talk to you.
yourbesthopeswc.com.
Oh, there will be all kinds of there will be all kinds of promotional, you know, in the video cut in
However,
the links. But yeah. We didn't really focus on that. You had mentioned it, but I'm glad you bring it up because your best hopes,
hope
LWC.
at Your Best Hopes WC for wellness coaching, yourbesthopeswc.com. And I'm always happy. People go, what do I do? I have no idea where to start. Hit me up for a complimentary
Yeah,
consultation. I'll explore it with you, and then we'll decide if we're a fit and how I can help you on your journey to singing your authentic note.
I love that. I love that, Julie. And yeah, I want to say that you know how our relationship over the years I think speaks for itself. But you're certainly an insightful and a gifted healer, and I'm very happy to hear about the direction your work is going. I lack myself. I have understanding. I have a good knowledge base, but I don't have certification in modalities or methods of like somatic, like it's not my area. So I would be referring people to you. I would be, you know, referring people to those practitioners
Yes.
who have built a robust skill set, those healers among us. So
And I do
thank
the
you.
same. I believe in we're building our community.
Oh,
So even amongst our fellow astrologers, if you have a particular area that you are super skilled at, and I'm going, I don't understand that. Hey, I'm going to send them your way. I think that's the important piece, is us singing our note, right?
yeah, that's
Send the
it. That's
people.
it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Share. Yeah.
And on that note, I'm
Perfect.
going to wind this down and end the recording. So thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everybody.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
You all sing in tune.
Yeah. Blessings, blessings, and see you next time.